Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Finally, on part of today's broadcast, we're going to talk about the impact that this election is having on our mental health, our civility, our respect. Samantha Silverman is the owner of Silver Linings Mental Health, and Kristen Walker is the clinical director for Counseling and Wellness Center of Pittsburgh, and we welcome them both to the broadcast. Kristen, we're going to start with you. I saw a newscast where someone in the neighborhood saw a Trump sign in her neighbor's yard, and she rang the ringtone, and obviously the neighbor was recording it because I think there was a sense of what exactly was going to happen. And when the neighbor answered the ringtone and they were speaking through the ringtone, she asked her, how in the world can you support this man? This man is evil. This man is the devil. This man is going to destroy our nation. How can you vote for him? How can you have a sign of this man in your yard? I think what really amazed me most was how calm this person was. She said, well, you know, it's my right, just like you have the right to vote for whomever you want to vote for. And I don't necessarily perceive him the way that you perceive him, and I wish you well. And then, out of nowhere, this was an old lady. She just started using expletives and F-bombs from everywhere, and the lady behind the camera door said, "God bless you, enjoy your life," and they moved on. Has it always been this way? Because that was definitely a sign to me, a mental illness, somebody becoming unhinged because of her perception what would happen if Donald Trump is reelected president.
I think this election is definitely bringing out very strong emotions for a lot of people. I've heard of people talking about not wanting to share who they are going to vote for, people hesitant to put signs up in the yard based upon how their neighbors may react. So there's definitely a lot of strong emotions coming up this election cycle, maybe even more so than the last 8 years or so.
What has changed?
Changed in general with mental health, or are you talking?
No, has the country changed? Has media changed? Has social media brought on something unforeseen that's being played out? What is bringing on this escalation of it all?
Well, I think social media plays a big part of it. There's a lot of very anxiety-provoking articles, posts, blogs on social media, which people are reading. And sometimes people are spending a lot of time, what was the term, doom scrolling a few years ago, trying to consume as much information as they can in a way to be informed. But I think it's also having a significant impact on our mental health as humans, too.
Samantha, every morning, I have a big family. There are 10 of us, 8 boys and 2 girls. And I usually do my power walk 3:45 a.m. in the morning. But I talk to them during this walk. I have 3 or 4 of my brothers and sisters on the phone. And we're so different in terms of our politics. We're pretty balanced. It's almost 50-50 voting for Harris and 50% voting for someone else. And, we laugh at the stories they tell about people angry, slam the doors, people toss their food at them, people pulling signs out of the yard. But yet in my family, my attitude is you vote for whoever you want to. That's what freedom is about. Why am I going to get upset with Samantha and Kristen if they're not voting for who I'm voting for? Isn't that what America is about? But why has it become so personal and violent? Why?
First of all, Armstrong, I want to commend you for practicing self-care. The fact that you are able to take a walk each morning and connect with your family is a huge, important thing that you are doing to promote self-care. So firstly, I'm so glad that you're doing that. And secondly, in terms of what you mentioned before with Kristen about the 24/7 news cycle, the brain is actually wired to pay attention to very uncomfortable information, very scary information. It actually triggers the fight or flight response, which is a coping mechanism that helps us in times of crisis or uncertainty. So across the country and even across the world, there is so much fight or flight responses occurring simultaneously.
Let me stay with you. So obviously, this is what we've seen played out in the attempted assassinations on the former president's life, whether it was in Pittsburgh or what we saw at Mar-a-Lago. First, we could say it was young people with their rage, their feel the only way they can change the world is save the world. You sort of build up some kind of mental mindset that you're doing the world a favor if you take this guy out. And then you saw somebody in their 60s trying to do the same. You know, the question really is how has the rise in anxiety and all this information that we're downloading all the time impacted different age groups in different years, and how do people get to the point where it becomes violent and you actually don't care about the consequences? You're willing to put it all on the line to break every perimeter of Secret Service, every law enforcement, to risk everything to absolutely attempt to assassinate a former president, a presidential candidate. How do you get to that place? You and I could never get to that place.
No, I will say that 50% of United States Americans do not access mental health care. Only half of us who need mental health are accessing care. So the rest of the individuals in our country are not reaching out if they have a mental health issue. And as you were just speaking to, Armstrong, anger is a huge indicator of somebody that could potentially have a mental health issue. Anger could be an indicator for anxiety, depression, or another underlying mental health disorder.
So, Kristen, because you guys have a lot of experience at this, you're a director at your facility. What would you say are some practical coping strategies individuals can use to manage anxiety in these uncertain times? Because you know what's unfortunate, Kristen? It's not going to get any better.
Well, as Samantha just referenced, you getting up at 3:45 in the morning to walk, that's a great coping mechanism. Being able to connect with people, like real people in real life outside of social media, is another great way of coping. Having those folks around you who you can talk about what's coming up for you, who can listen to you. Volunteering at the local shelter and walking a dog is an amazing way to cope. Dogs typically are non-judgmental, so we can really have a connection with dogs that maybe we don't always have with people if people are more difficult. Taking time out during the day to practice some mindfulness. That can be as easy as going outside and just noticing the fresh air, noticing the trees changing colors. There's a lot of things that we can do that are very simple that can be incorporated into our daily lives that really can have longer term benefits.
You know, Samantha, Kristen, I'm using myself, which is unusual today, as an example. So I had a friend last Sunday. I was decluttering because I watched something about the victims in North Carolina and Tennessee and Florida, and I realized simple things like lotion, shaving cream, baby oil, soap, toothbrush, all those things that I have just overpopulated in my house, that I just started packing stuff and said, I'm going to ship this out to help these people. But all of a sudden, a friend of mine called out of the blue, and she just started railing about Trump and Harris. I said, look, it is Sunday. On Sunday, I do not talk about Trump. I do not talk about Harris. We can talk about decluttering so you can have less stress and less anxiety in your home, but we're not going to talk about Trump and Harris today, okay? Now, you and I can do it on Monday through Friday, but not today. And then she and I had this most delightful conversation, and she said at the end, I was been so stressed, and I forget there's so much more to our lives than just talking about politics. Samantha.
Yes, that is such a great example as well, Armstrong. And also another self-care mechanism that you're doing is you're setting boundaries. You're saying, I will talk politics Monday through Friday, but Sunday I am not discussing politics. Setting those boundaries, that even goes back to what Kristen was referencing a few minutes ago about the doomsday scrolling. Set boundaries for yourself on the social media you're accessing. put timers on your phone and your devices, setting those time limitations. That is so important for our mental health and overall well-being.
You know, now, Kristen, this will shock you because we run a big media company, okay? And you would assume, and there are about 10 or 12 people in my personal space in my office. It is so rare that we talk politics, it would shock you. It was so rare. We talk about the stock market. We talk about families. I've got employees who have kids. We'll talk about the kids. We'll talk about real estate. And then we book the shows and the kind of guests that we book. Never get into what the person's politics is. We get into the topic. And then and when people come in our office space, they say, my God, it's so calm in here. And everybody is peaceful because people forget that there's just so much more that you can do to change whatever mental situation you have that you're dealing with, but you got to have people help you along. You can't do it by yourself. It's not that we don't want to talk about politics, but we talk about politics in a way, you know, Aaron can talk about whatever he wants to talk about. Aideen can talk about whatever she wants to talk about. And when we disagree, it's a lot of laughter. I find it hilarious because, listen, if everybody agrees, somebody's not necessary. Differing of opinions is a fun thing, not a stressful thing. It depends on how you look at it and how you yourself accept it when someone is expressing their opinion. We're going to more on that when we come back. I'm so glad we're doing this topic on social media, on this mental health and the craziness that's going on in this country. But I want you to know, that's not the story of the entire country. Some people do very well in these times. They don't breach relationships. They speak to their family members like some of you guys that not talk to your family members, your brothers and sisters, because you disagree politically. I think that is absolutely insane. Makes no sense. But I got two experts, Samantha and Kristen. We'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break. Don't go away. Okay, here we go. So, Kristen, you know, in my role, I ask a lot of questions and you and Samantha respond to them. But what are some of the things that we should cover today while we're at the top of the hour that's also critical to this conversation from your experiences?
I think, first of all, encouraging people, you know, that encouragement to seek out mental health services. Samantha referenced at the beginning, 50% of people who really could benefit from mental health treatment don't access it. There's a lot of reasons for that. So really talking about destigmatizing mental health is healthcare. And the more that we can get that message out there, the more it enables and empowers people to do those things that are going to be really beneficial for them. So that's probably the biggest one.
Well, what about people using sometimes mental health as a crutch and exploiting it and taking advantage of it, Kristen?
Well, I think that I'm always hesitant to call it a crutch or exploitation. I think we don't know what people are experiencing. We don't know their lives until we walk in their shoes. You know, I think I tend to view things from a very strength-based perspective and saying, hey, so what can we do? So if this is really hard for you and these are the reasons that you can't do something, let's really try to focus on what you can do. And sometimes when you can encourage folks to start in that regard, it's less of a struggle for them to do what they need to do.
Well, you know, Samantha, I've seen people who have used mental illness as an excuse to seek out benefits. And, you know, you call them out on it, and then eventually they admit the obvious. Not everybody who's crying mental illness is in need of mental health care. I mean, it would be interesting to know what policy changes are critical to improving access to mental health here in our country, and how these political platforms have evolved into addressing these mental health issues.
Sure. So, firstly, depression is actually the leading cause of disability worldwide. And I think that we need additional infrastructure and foundational support to address mental health. Oftentimes, mental health is grouped into overall health care, and it's so important to separate mental health from that overarching umbrella. Mental health needs to be its own entity. There needs to be more services, more benefits, increased health insurance coverage. And it's so important for everybody to know what mental health benefits they either have or they need.
You know, Kristen, you know what my biggest concern is today? I don't think we've seen anything like what we're going to see, depending on who wins this year's presidential election. Because both sides that are loyal to each other think that the other is an existential threat to our democracy. And people have even mentioned that America is so fragile now that we could be on the brink of a civil war. But I think the civil war is that people believe that if either candidate wins, it's the end of civility. And so in what ways could this election outcome shape the mental health in the future, and how should we prepare ourselves to embrace this?
Well, I think first, referencing what Samantha just said, access is key. And so, in order to embrace and to be able to kind of deal with what's going to happen, folks need to have access to services. I don't know what the numbers are right now, but at one point in the middle of the pandemic, I mean, some of those psychiatric appointments were 14, 16 months out before people could get in. If somebody was trying to get psychological testing, sometimes those wait lists were over a year long. And so when we think about the mental health of Americans and people needing that support right now, we need to have those supports in place. And so in order to be able to prepare and to be able to support people in whatever happens with the election, we need to have resources and we need to have places where they can go and get the help and support that they need.
You know, Samantha, I think one of the biggest issues that is overlooked in this mental health discussion is that when parents are in conflict in the home, when kids are in abusive situations, when kids are left alone, I think what is often overlooked is the mental health of our children, the depression of our children. When we talk about this mental health in these presidential elections, we like to talk about adults, but what about the little babies, the children who are so impacted by this?
That's such a great point, Armstrong. I actually have a 13-year-old son, and before I got on this call, I asked him one of the key things that I was overlooking is how is he feeling with this election cycle? As you just stated, 7 out of 10 adults are actually experiencing election anxiety. There is something called election stress disorder. And like you said, it not only affects adults, but it also affects children. And my son's words verbatim, when I asked him about what his fears are relating to the election, was that people were going to hurt other people and the amount of violence would increase. And that is a very real threat that I think children are afraid of.
Do you think, stay with that point, that mental health services should be prioritized at the same level as physical health care?
Absolutely. I think that mental health is just as important as physical health. And oftentimes we neglect our mental health because it's not always something that we can notice on the outside. However, physical health and mental health are so closely intertwined. 40% of individuals who have depression or a mental health issue also have a physical issue, such as cardiovascular disease or metabolic disease. And the two oftentimes do go hand in hand.
You know, Kristen, I just had this thought. You know, I know immigrants and open borders is a huge issue in this election, but man, those families being torn away from their homes, crossing those waters, separated from their kids separated from their parents for months in a strange land that's unfamiliar, to them, what about their mental health? Because their mental health is going to eventually impact ours.
Absolutely. You think about children and you think about children not having a voice or children being torn apart from their families and childhood, those attachment styles, how we engage with the world, how we learn to trust people happens in childhood. And so when those needs aren't being met or addressed, those issues go into adulthood. It's not as if somebody turns 18 and they've had a really tough childhood that all just goes away. So very much a lot of concern for those families at the border who are being separated and those children who are not with their parents anymore.
What are the most common barriers preventing people from using mental health services today?
I would say that health insurance is one of the most common barriers from individuals utilizing health insurance. Either people lack health insurance benefits or their health insurance benefits lack adequate mental health coverage. And as a provider who accepts insurance in my practice, we see that way too frequently, in which somebody will have very limited health insurance benefits. They either have to pay out of pocket for mental health, or their health insurance reimburses providers at such a low rate that providers are very skeptical and hesitant to accept and enter into contracts with those health insurance companies.
Kristen, what are the most common barriers preventing people from using mental health services today?
I think what Samantha just talked about, insurance is a big issue. I just wanted to kind of add what she said. Sometimes people do have mental health coverage, but they have an astronomical deductible that they just can't afford to access these services or treat their mental health. Stigma is another issue. There is still sometimes this mentality that we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we shouldn't be out there asking for help. But the reality is people need people, and mental health issues can be treated. Those seem to be the two biggest barriers that I've run into with folks throughout my 30 years.
What demographics, Samantha, do you find, what living conditions, a work environment, or professions where you find where mental illness has the least impact? What is it about a person's life that sort of protects them and helps them to adjust quickly, and mental health does not impact them in ways that it does most people around this world?
I would say that there are marginalized demographic societies in which they are either not open to discussing mental health, or there still is that stigma with asking for care. In our practice, we've actually seen an increase of the LGBTQ youth community come in and ask for mental health services because of everything going on with the election and because of the stress involved. That demographic seems to be one of the most affected populations just in terms of this election cycle that our practice is seeing right now.
You know, Kristen, there's a lot of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation, and many people get bent out of shape and really go into overdrive based on information that they embrace, that they consider to be fact, because there are a lot of services out there that have experts at whipping people into a frenzy, bringing about anxiety, and causing them to do and react to things that this is not something that they would normally do. How do we fight against this and disinformation?
I think first and foremost, having resources and having folks available to talk about the misinformation out there, having people in our lives who can kind of challenge maybe some of our beliefs, maybe even very gently. I think that one of the biggest issues that comes up is, our brains are designed to protect us. That's what our brains do. So when we see misinformation and we see something that could be considered a threat to our own well-being, we are going to latch onto that and really look at that, and it's going to bring up more fear for us. So if we can also get out some information about how the brain works, Samantha did a great job doing a very brief explanation of fight or flight. And that's what's happening a lot of times when people see misinformation. they grab onto it because they want to be able to protect themselves. We don't like uncertainty as humans, so we will grab onto anything that we feel like gives us a sense of certainty,
Well, listen,
whether those facts are incorrect.
I cannot thank you and Samantha enough for what you do every day. We have no idea the lives you impact, pulling people away from the cliff, being there as a bridge between families, and providing them the mental health that they need. We need more people like you in the world, the compassion, the experience, not being judgmental. You accept people where they are and take them where they need to be. And I appreciate what you do. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, Michael and Simon will join us to talk about immigration and the border. Again, thank you for what you do, and we look forward to having you back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Simon Hankinson is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation with Border Security and Immigration Center. And then Michael Yan, who's frequently on our show, is the author, analyst, and a war correspondent. Michael, what is the state of our borders?
We have no borders, sir. I mean, they're wide open. I just told that to Newt Gingrich a couple days ago. There's just zero borders. The Darien Gap right now, I'm getting, as you know, I've spent a lot of time down the Darien Gap, about 6 months since Biden was installed. That's the gap between Colombia and Panama. It's that little jungle that's quite intense down there. And now it's getting absolutely flooded. Now, keep in mind, people who come in from all over the world to South America, or if you're already in South America, all you have to do is make it to Colombia, get through the Darien Gap, as do often thousands per day, and then you can easily get to the U.S. border. Now, a lot of other people fly directly to Nicaragua or other places, for instance, to Mexico. Others go to Canada. The Canadian border, I've been up there earlier this year as well, is also wide open in both directions. And then there is the Bahamas border. I was there also this year. That's like our fourth border that nobody seems to pay much attention to. But, you know, there's a large Chinese port right off the coast of Florida in the Bahamas. We were just over there some months ago, giant Chinese embassy there. So these are all different routes that are being used to invade the United States. And invasion's the right word. It's similar to Europe or even Japan, believe it or not. A lot of people don't believe that that's happening in Japan, but there's a town in Japan called Kawaguchi. I was there some months ago. It's filled with Kurds now. I mean, I like Kurds. I get along great with Kurds. I spent a lot of time with them in Iraq and other places, but you know, some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium, and it's just not working out well in Japan. But they continue to bring more in. All of these countries are under the same forms of attack. For instance, I'm currently in Thailand, but tomorrow I fly back to Japan and then back to South America to check it out down there. But one thing, and this is very important.
Hold that point. Let me get Simon in on this conversation. Simon, welcome to our broadcast house.
Good to be here.
How big of a threat is it to our national security, not only in our way of life, and do you have any understanding to differentiate between what the vice president is saying she would do if she's elected, or what Trump will do if he's reelected?
As to how big a threat it is, I think it's a threat on almost every level. There's terrorism. We've had over 70,000 special interest aliens who we know practically nothing about who've been let in. We've got several hundred actual known terrorists who've been let in. We have thousands of people being let in weekly who we don't know anything about, so we have no idea what criminal records they have. And every day I read about another crime committed by someone who was let in under parole or released at the border or just got away from any inspection at all. And then you have the threat to our economy. There's a lot of discussion about whether immigration is good or bad in the long run, but I think every expert agrees that in the short term, unskilled immigrants take more than they give. And they certainly need things. They need hospitals, they need schools, they need public services. So we're seeing small towns and big cities overwhelmed without the resources to take care of it. And then I think there's the larger sort of philosophical threat, which is to our national sovereignty. Either we get to decide, just like a homeowner, who comes into our house and who stays, or we cede that authority to other people in other countries. And that seems to be the decision before us right now, which leads me to your second question. Based on what she's said in the past, you can either choose to believe the Kamala Harris of right now or the Kamala Harris of her career. I choose to believe classic Kamala. I think she ideologically is aligned with the abolitionist camp, that's sort of in scare quotes, who do not believe essentially that you should prevent anyone from arriving and entering the United States if they say that they want to claim asylum. And she's not shown herself keen on interior enforcement. So I imagine she would continue those policies if elected. And I think President Trump's policies are pretty clear from his first term, and I imagine he would resurrect those if he was elected.
You know, Michael, why is it that we don't deploy more technology to better use in enhancing the border security? And what do you think are the most significant security threats currently facing the borders, beside the things that you mentioned?
Armstrong, the border is easy to close, contrary to what people seem to think. It's just a matter of numerous things. But first of all, we have to use the right words when we're talking about things. This is not about immigration. This is not about jobs and that sort of thing. We are in a state of war. Words are the atomic structures of truth and lies, right? It's not a vaccine, it's a bioweapon, right? We are in a state of war. Ireland is completely invaded. I was in Ireland a couple of years ago looking at it. I get daily updates in Ireland, including today. There's camps all over Ireland. And likewise in Europe. I spent a lot of time in Europe looking at the situation there. IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is the main engine of the invasion. They're not the only one, but the fact is we're in a state of war. It's a multi-spectrum war. There's many different weapons being deployed. For instance, drugs. I'm in Thailand at the moment. I'll be gone tomorrow. But here in Thailand, just 2 years ago, I didn't see any dope stores here. Now, according to a lawyer here in Thailand, there are about 9,400 licenses for store outlets for marijuana. It's everywhere, but it's not actually marijuana. It's something else. I've been in there. I've been looking at these stores. There's one right outside my hotel. They're everywhere. Just in 2 years, about two and a half years, they've got 9,400 licenses, and I must have seen 1,000 of these stores. They're absolutely everywhere. And so keeping in mind, war is one of the weapons in this multi-spectrum war. I mean, I'm sorry, drugs. And drugs have been used in warfare since forever. Not just alcohol against the Indians and whatnot, but opium. Now, a lot of people often say that the British used the opium war against the Chinese, but the Chinese use opium war all the time. They still do. And they were doing it since before the British. So in other words, this is not something that is new or not, it's not novel at all. And
let me stop you there. How does this tie in? This is crazy, by the way. The vice president and her 4-point plan to woo men who happen to be black to her campaign, she mentioned that she would legalize marijuana, which I thought was so offensive and so disgusting. But you see this happen in these communities, this marijuana, these opium shops, these cannabis shops. How does this also tie in to what we are seeing with this movement to legalize it? And we see the impact that it's having in these communities.
It's horrific. I mean, I see it all over the world. I travel all over the United States, all over the West Coast and coast to coast. I mean, when I travel back, I spend most of my time downrange in other countries, about 100 other countries. When I come back to my country, the United States, I can see that my people are drugged up, whether it's prescription drugs, drunk on alcohol, that sort of thing, or just going in Washington, D.C., you get on an elevator, it smells like you're in a dope shop. All over the place, Atlanta, Miami, everywhere I go. This is a weapon of war. It's interesting how she says, yeah, we're black men, we're going to give you dope, right? That's an attack on the actual people themselves. Let me give you some dope, right? And Brave New World, the drug was called Soma, right? Everybody got their Soma. Keep them dumbed down, keep them lazy. They don't want to fight, right? We got men now that talk about the border, but they'll never go down there. I've been across the entire border, as have many of us, but no critical mass of men is standing up. They're just watching Joe Rogan push the dope. I attack Joe Rogan every chance I get. He reaches millions of young people. Our young people are watching these role models who make a lot of money push dope on them. This is a primary weapon. Information war is the highest form of warfare. That's what we're doing right now, talking into these microphones. But when you're doing information warfare, you want people tired, you want them isolated, you want them drunk or on drugs. This is how you brainwash people. This is brainwashing 101.
Hold that
These
point.
drugs are part of it, sir.
Hold there. I love your passion, by the way. Sarah, how does instability in regions near U.S. borders affect our national security?
Well, it's never good for us to have countries on our borders, whether it be Haiti or Mexico, in trouble. Haiti right now is unfortunately in the middle of its latest cycle of ungovernability and chaos. Mexico has been run by a far left government, essentially, and chunks of it have been ceded to cartels that are working in some respects in collusion with the government. That's really not healthy for us because that's where all the fentanyl comes, is across that border, and most of the illegal immigration, although as Michael points out, there is more and more coming from the northern border. And other countries, when they're stable, they can help us. Panama right now is trying to help us stop the massive flow through the Darien Gap, and they just need our help with airlifting people who are pure economic migrants and not asylum seekers back to where they came from. That would turn off the giant magnet that is drawing people to the United States, the policies of our current administration. But the U.S. government is not helping them do that. Mexico, we could certainly strong arm or persuade, however you want to phrase it, to do a lot more to control its border with Guatemala and Belize in the south. Guatemala, under the previous president, was happy to help us stop the flow into their country and so on. So we need the cooperation of Latin American countries, and the more that they fall into chaos or into leftist governance, I think the worse off we are.
Michael, in a minute before we go to break, what did you learn from your 40-day fast?
Oh, I loved it. I loved fasting. It was unbelievable. It was 40 days, and I almost wanted to keep going, actually. I did want to keep going, but I just thought it was unwise. I would suggest everybody try at least a 3 or 4 or 5 day fast, but I actually did 40, believe it or not, and it wasn't that difficult. And you feel better while you're doing it, weirdly. And again, when I got to the 40 days, I wanted to keep going. I just thought it was unwise.
And we'll be back. Boy, I can't believe he talked that.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Summer, what is often left out in this discussion about the border, about immigration in this presidential election?
I think that the narrative that is being discussed is just the wrong one. There has been a lot of talk of some magic border bill that would have fixed everything. There was one in 2021 that was proposed, which was essentially a mass amnesty. Now, you can think that an amnesty is a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing, but you have to acknowledge that if you pardon 10, 15 million people, that's going to tell all the others trying to get in illegally that might be on the cards in the future. And this Senate border bill that is bandied about not only doesn't solve the problem of this giant magnet sucking people into the United States, but in fact, it enshrines a lot of the bad policies that I would argue are illegal that are being done by this administration into permanence. So we should be talking about the real question, which is, are we going to cede our national sovereignty and our borders to basically anybody who wants to come? Are we just going to say, we can't stop it, we're going to give up? Or are we going to go back to what we know works, enforce the border security at the border and then in the interior and with our allies and to the south, and then have the real discussion, which is how much immigration is in the national interest that's good for us, that we need, and how do we organize that? And finally pass maybe some bipartisan legislation that does that has immigration centered on the interest of the United States and American citizens and not on the entire rest of the world. That's the question and the discussion we should be having.
Michael, what will be the impact of all people who definitely are not trying to embrace a better way of life and want to contribute to the prosperity of America? How many of them are useful tools from some diabolical terrorist attack? I mean, look at what happened just in the Midwest. They disrupted this terrorist attack that they were planning on Election Day. Is this more of an anomaly? Is it something that we should be concerned about?
Should definitely be concerned. I mean, many of the Chinese that I see coming through are clear. They, look like military or some sort of active arm of intelligence, like MSS types, Ministry of State Security. It's like their CIA. You wouldn't believe how many of the people I've interviewed down there. Many of them these days, they don't talk anymore. This is actually child's play to stop. Stopping the people that are coming across the border is not the way to do it. That's like swatting flies. The thing is we go to the engine room. The engine room is the United Nations, IOM. It's people within our own. Defund the United Nations for starters. Start targeting all these people that are doing this, like HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Society, the Catholic Charities, which are all they're all getting their funding from people like the IOM. Their headquarters is in Panama City at a place called Ciudad de Saber. I always get my hotel room right beside IOM headquarters, right next to the Panama Canal. We know where they're at. Their headquarters over here in Asia is in Manila. We know who they are. We know where they're at. They got 2 offices near me here in Bangkok. And these are the main engines. You go for those guys. It's simple. They don't have an army. You just have to stop them, stop funding them, close their offices, close everybody that's doing this, and block them. Panama wants to close it. You know why Panama wants to close it? Our work, the work of my team, Operation Burning Edge. We're the one that helped to get that president on that platform. I spent 6 months down there. My team spent other time down there, both when I was there and when I wasn't. And what we started doing was telling the Panamanians how much MDR-TB is coming through. That's multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. How much of the dengue is coming through, malaria, a strain from Africa, all these different things, because a lot of the children are getting sick down there now. Many of the Panamanians are getting sick, especially the ones that are right by the trail of where the invaders are coming through. There's a lot of crime in Panama. So we built that platform. I never met with the president, never asked to meet him. We just built that upswell. And the next thing you know, he ran on that platform and he won, right? And so we set the conditions for that. We did it intentionally. Likewise, when Elon Musk started going to the border, that was, if you notice, when my team was at SpaceX, we spent about 2 weeks there at SpaceX saying that those aliens were coming right across the Rio Grande into SpaceX property, which they were, we have on video. And, even as aliens are preparing at SpaceX to go to Mars, which is great, but And then you'll notice that Elon Musk immediately started paying attention to the border. We did that with intention. We also brought attention to Colony Ridge, which is it's a colony of about 200,000 aliens right north of Houston. We got a helicopter. I got a couple congressmen there, got Epoch Times and Daily Wire and a lot of others up there. And the next thing you know, a lot of lawsuits were generated out of that, a lot of attention. None of these things have been shut down, though, because people within our government are keeping it open. And the United Nations is doing a lot of these things.
Hold that for us. Simon, how can border policy strike a balance between security and the humanitarian concerns?
I would argue that we had a pretty good balance for a long time. I mean, immigration policy never pleases everybody. Everybody hates it. That's kind of been the rule. But we had a refugee admissions program where people were screened overseas. That's how Ilhan Omar got here, and millions of others. They would let in. I think the cap last year was 125,000. The year before that, it was lower. But that's a carefully organized program that makes sure people are genuinely fleeing persecution on the grounds that are required under our law, makes sure that they're not a national security threat, make sure their relationships are as claimed, and so on. But that system has basically been thrown out of the window in favor of allowing everybody to show up. Let everybody in is the policy of this administration. I mean, almost everybody, 85+%. And then stop enforcing on the interior. So even if they get ruled by a judge, sorry, you don't qualify for asylum, you have to go home, here's your order for removal, they're still here. There's 1.3 million of those people here, and about 500,000 of them are have criminal records or in criminal proceedings. So I think we've tossed the rule of law out of the window, and so redressing that first is essential before we can have the bigger conversation about how do we balance those needs. Right now the balance is way too far on the side of anyone who shows up, we'll take you at your word. And we just know, I mean, this woman, La Barbie they call her, she doesn't look like a Barbie, she's got tattoos from head to toe. She was running a brothel with trafficked girls in El Paso. She came to the border, said, yeah, I'm fleeing for persecution, and they let her in so that she could claim asylum with a notice to, and she went straight into a life of crime, and we have hundreds of examples of that happening every day. So I would say the balance has swung way too far to the left. We need to get it back to where it was.
Michael, how would you say that the visa policies and the immigration quotas influence border security today?
This is amazingly easy. We have to recognize that we're in a state of war. This is actual war. We have to use the right words. This is not immigration. We are being invaded. What? I got a book right here somewhere, or it's on the other table. It's called Weapons of Mass Migration, right? This is just like the drugs are an old weapon of war, mass migration, that's one of the reasons Rome is no longer with us, is mass migration. But often that mass migration is in service to war, right? Often it is done with great intent. For instance, in Ireland, I've had the camps mapped out over there. You should see where these migrant camps are. They're almost all of them are military-age males. I've gone over to Ireland. I would say at this point in Ireland that the numbers of military-aged males, invaders, let's call them what they are, is probably equal to or maybe even greater than the military-aged males that are in Ireland. And they've got an army of 6,000 people approximately, and some of that army is deployed overseas, right? The Irish, I'm talking about the Republic of Ireland, is just and the United Kingdom as well. But the Republic of Ireland is, I think it will be genocided. I think the Irish will be genocided, right? I mean, actually killed or ran off. And then what I think will happen after that is the invaders will be genocided as well. I'm seeing these nested genocides. Conditions are, keep in mind, I've spent my life studying wars or in wars. This is what I do. And that's why I'm telling you, I'm warning you. We should not be talking about immigration. We should be talking about we are in a state of war. These people are not here to get jobs. They're overwhelming us. These drugs that are flooding all over our streets are part of that war. It's been a long time. A lot of the Chinese that are coming in, they're growing dope in giant farms up in Maine and other places. They just got caught with an illegal bank in California. These are people that are coming in, some of the people coming in, such as the Chinese, they know how to actually run a country. They're coming in to basically terraform the United States into China. Not all Chinese, of course, but there is certainly a subset, which is substantial, which are here to actually take the United States. Now, keep in mind, I've written 3 books on Chinese information war. Unfortunately, they're only in Japanese. They're not in English because I've been working for many years to wake up Japan to this threat.
Hold that point. How do you respond to what you're hearing? Should we not call it immigration?
Well, let me answer your question, which is about visa policies and quotas. And I was a consular officer for 22 years. I've done probably 100,000 visa interviews. I've signed a lot of immigrant visas, and this is a subject I know pretty well. There is no supply that is big enough to match the demand in the world. In other words, the number of people that would come here if they could is in the low billions, I would estimate. And I don't think anyone believes that the United States has the capacity to absorb hundreds of millions of people in a very short time. So visas essentially set limits, and those limits could be higher, they could be lower. Right now they're about 1 million legal and probably another 500,000 that come in through various other ways. And that is the policy discussion. So you cannot address, as some people say, well, we just need to have more legal pathways. We could make it 1 million, 5 million, 10 million a year, and not only would it overwhelm our services and our economy, but it would never be enough. So we have to have enforcement of the rules that we have while we discuss changing those rules, or else we've surrendered our sovereignty and our authority.
Michael, your final thoughts?
We are in a state of war. This is not about migration. You've got Japanese, quite a few that I know, that can't even get into America. No criminal records,
Michael,
whatever.
Your final thoughts, Michael. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts is we are in a state of war. We're in a state of war.
You said that. Tell us what we don't know. We get that part. Is there anything else?
It's very important. It's very important to stop talking about this as like it's immigration. This is an invasion, right? And the drugs are part of the war. And there's the economic side. The economy obviously is preparing to collapse. This is why I'm involved. Otherwise,
and this is why we continuously have you as a guest on our platform. Your final thoughts, Simon? 30 seconds.
We can't have open borders and a welfare state. We need to take a step back, stop looking at this as a personality, you hate immigrants, you like immigrants, and just say what is in the best interest of the United States and what system would be fair to American citizens as well as those seeking to come here.
Samantha, Kristen, Michael, Simon, and to all of you watching today, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Vote. Everything is at stake in this election. Cash it.